Welcome to today's Explainer. We're doing something really exciting today. We are fundamentally shifting our perspective on one of the absolute most complex challenges in human health. For the longest time, we viewed cancer simply as a disease of broken genes. Just a chaotic biological mistake. But what if it's actually something far more sophisticated than that? What if we're looking at a highly dynamic, actively evolving ecosystem? Today, we're going to look at this disease through a completely Darwinian lens, exploring it as an incredible, albeit pretty dark story of cellular survival.
Okay, so let's just dive right into this biological journey. Here's our roadmap. We'll start with the genetics of cancer, move into the evolutionary perspective, and then explore clonal selection and dynamic adaptation. Finally, we'll look at the tumor microenvironment and how we might eventually break this link.
All right, part one, the genetics of cancer. Let's establish that biological baseline. To understand what goes wrong, we have to look at what's normal. Our bodies are absolute marvels, literally made up of trillions of individual cells. And inside almost every single one of those is a nucleus that acts like a command center. It protects our DNA, which is the genetic blueprint that makes you, you. A quick fun fact from our sources here, because of our unique human genomes, we actually share far more genetically with a chimpanzee than we do with a dog, a flea, or a mushroom, which thankfully, right? But seriously, this incredibly precise identical genetic code works perfectly until things like UV radiation or even just simple replication errors during cell division cause a genetic mutation.
Now, what's really fascinating is the stark contrast between healthy cells and mutated ones. Normal cells are the ultimate rule followers. They follow really strict regulations to grow, they stop exactly when they're told to, and they'll even altruistically sacrifice themselves through programmed cell death called apoptosis if they detect they're damaged. Cancer cells, though, they are the ultimate rule breakers. They completely ignore stop signals, they evade apoptosis, and they just grow totally out of control.
Moving to part two, an evolutionary perspective, going from genes gone awry to dynamic evolution.
For decades, the scientific community focused super heavily on what's called the somatic mutation theory. That's basically the idea that cancer is just a bottom-up problem of broken genes. But carcinogenesis, the actual birth of a cancer, is a remarkably dynamic process. We really need to step back and look at the bigger picture here. We are actually witnessing evolution on a macroscopic scale. It's a journey of transformation where cells acquire highly specific traits over their lifespan just to survive.
Think about it this way. A normal cell doesn't just wake up malignant one day. Different, continuous insults, things like environmental toxins, cancer-causing oncoviruses, or natural replication errors, they act as extreme evolutionary pressures. Just like animals adapting to a brutal winter environment, these cells are literally forced to acquire new traits to survive harsh biological conditions.
That brings us to part three, clonal selection and survival, the elimination of the weak.
Let's talk about the brutal biological mechanics of how the absolute fittest, most dangerous cells are forged. It's an evolutionary concept called clonal selection. It turns out, things we usually think of as helpful, like our body naturally inducing apoptosis or starving a tumor of nutrients, actually act as a selective filter. They wipe out the weak, less fit cancer cells. And what does that do? Well, it essentially evacuates the niche. It makes plenty of room for the strongest, most ruthless mutated clones to completely take over.
These surviving cells are facing incredibly harsh environments. We're talking excessive signaling, heavy toxins, metabolic stress, low oxygen. But instead of just dying off like a normal cell would, these victorious clones subvert those stress responses. They hijack the body's natural defense systems to prioritize their own survival and propagation. It is literally survival of the fittest, just happening at the cellular level.
Let's look closer at this in part four, dynamic adaptation to stress, the hallmarks of survival.
Scientists have categorized these as the hallmarks of cancer, but honestly, we need to stop thinking of them as just a list of symptoms. They are incredible adaptive superpowers. These cells dynamically adapt by finding the exact right balance of growth signals. If they need oxygen, no problem. They literally prompt new blood vessels to grow right toward them. They rewire their own metabolism so they can gorge on nutrients for rapid growth, and they'll even accumulate extra chromosome parts to double down on these traits.
And their most impressive trick? Evading our body's ultimate defense force. Through a long process called immunoediting, cancer dynamically adapts to our immune system. It happens in 3 steps. First is elimination, where our immune system recognizes and attacks. But then comes equilibrium.
This is a prolonged phase, sometimes lasting years, where the immune system continuously sculpts the tumor, accidentally selecting for the most resistant variants. And finally, escape. This is where new variants emerge that completely resist immune pressure, sometimes even tricking our own immune cells into acting as biological bodyguards for the tumor. Crazy, right?
So how do they sustain this? Part 5. The abetting microenvironment, building a supportive ecosystem.
These cells do not do this alone. This collaborative ecosystem is best understood through the seed and soil hypothesis. A tumor isn't just an isolated lump of bad cells. It's an incredibly active, collaborative neighborhood. The cancer cells, they are the seeds, actively manipulate surrounding healthy cells, immune cells, and blood vessels to create an abetting microenvironment. That's the soil. When cancer metastasizes or spreads, it dynamically communicates with distant tissues to find the absolute perfect biological soil to invade.
Knowing how incredibly adaptive and collaborative these evolutionary ecosystems are, well, it begs a massive question for the medical world. Why do tumors become drug-resistant? It all comes back to the exact same evolutionary principle we've been talking about.
Treating this disease has literally always been an arms race. Way back in 3000 BC, we used basic surgical cauterization. By 1896, X-rays gave us radiation, and the 1940s brought cytotoxic chemotherapy. But here's the catch. These older treatments often acted like blunt instruments, targeting all rapidly dividing cells, which, if you think about it, just provided another extreme stressor for the tumor to evolve resistance against. Today, though, the strategy is shifting. Since about 2017, we are fighting dynamic adaptation with dynamic precision. We're using personalized neoantigen vaccines and mRNA technology to specifically target the unique genetic mutations of an individual's tumor. It's a totally different ballgame.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 6, Breaking the Link, the future of evolutionary medicine.
So what is the biggest risk factor for this entire evolutionary process? It isn't just toxins, it is simply time. As we age, our body's natural ability to clear out damaged DNA drops. Research now shows that totally normal-looking aged skin or blood cells actually carry massive burdens of mutations. It's a phenomenon seen in conditions like clonal hematopoiesis. Simply put, our own aging provides the prolonged runway that normal cells need to accumulate mutations, face stressors, and undergo that really dark evolutionary selection process we've been unpacking today.
And that leaves us with a truly profound question to end on. If this disease is fundamentally an evolutionary response to cellular stress and time, could the ultimate cure actually lie outside of cancer research altogether? Unlocking the biological secrets of aging itself and learning how to maintain our cellular machinery might just be our ultimate weapon in preventing this evolutionary ecosystem from ever taking root in the first place. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this new perspective changes how you look at the sheer resilience and complexity of the human cell.